she comes and she says, did you see your son? And I said, yeah. She said, I think you need to tell your son goodbye. And I'm like, why? And she says, because I don't think you're going to make it. So if you have any relatives that you need to talk to, you need to do that before we take you downstairs. And so I was like, I told my son, I will see him tomorrow. And I will see him tomorrow.
Hey, 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 welcome back. This is Renee Nicole,
And this is Lillian.
and you are tuned into the But God podcast, and we are so excited to have you back. This episode is going to be a little different than the others. We are going to share our miraculous but God experiences. We, always talk about, some things that we are encountering throughout the week. We talk to other people about their extraordinary experiences with God. And now we want to dive into our own so you can get to know Lillian and I a little bit better. So, without any further ado, I'm going to let Lillian take the lead here. What is your but God experience that stands out to you?
So the one that stands out to me the most would be in 2010. I was pregnant. I was 5.5 months pregnant with my daughter, and I was told at that time it was a high risk pregnancy. I was 34. I think it was like 34, something like that. And they said it was a high risk pregnancy. And oh no, they called it, yeah, high risk pregnancy and geriatric pregnancy, which who wants to hear the word geriatric when they're 34?
Yeah.
And so throughout that pregnancy, they had me going to see special doctors and stuff. And so um, I wasn't happy with the pregnancy because of where I was in my life and the situations that were going on in my life. And I was on bed rest for like a good portion of like maybe 6 weeks, maybe. And because of my cervix was opening, because I had a history with my son, my cervix opened and I was put on bed rest at 7.5 months pregnant when I was pregnant with him. And so they were afraid it's starting to open. And I was only like 4 months at the time, maybe not even. So they said that, you just want to be careful. So they put me on bed rest. And then I remember I went back to work after being on bed rest for, I think it was like 6 weeks or something like that, maybe less. And so one of the things, I'll just back up a minute. When I went to see the specialist, he said, you should terminate this pregnancy. And I was very, very offended because my son was still in the room with me and he was, I don't know, maybe 11 or 12 years old at the time. And I felt like he shouldn't have said that in front of my son, who you think kids playing video games like this are not listening. He was listening, obviously. He doesn't have headsets on. So I said, I'm not going to terminate the pregnancy. And he said, well, you should because, this pregnancy could possibly kill you. He said, because, you have a lot of scarring in your uterus and you have fibroids and it just doesn't look good. And I said, well, you're not God. I got really upset with him. I said, you're not God. And I said, I can leave your office right now and get hit by an 18-wheeler truck. Or I don't know, I could suffer something terrible and die. Only God knows when my time is up. And only God will be the one to tell me when my time is up. And he won't even tell me, just to take me home. I said, I don't think you should be saying these things. Especially, I'm a Christian woman. I told him, I'm a Christian woman and I don't believe in that. And so I was really upset with that doctor. And I let my doctors know that, because my doctors are Christian, and they were really upset to find out that he was giving this kind of advice to her patients. So after I come off of bed rest, I go to work, and I was in an intensive audit at the job that I was in. It was a really stressful time and I was sitting down. Now, because I had all of this scarring in my belly, in my uterus, I looked like I was probably 7 months pregnant, but I was only 5.5 months. So, like when I had my son, I didn't even pop until I was almost 6 months pregnant, meaning I was showing. But now I was fully showing. Like people were like, "When are you due?" And I'm like, "I'm just getting started," you know. So I remember I was at work and we were working, and it was a stressful day. I had been sitting all day. I had gotten up to go to the bathroom, and when I came back and sat at my desk, I just was like, "Oh," and I just stretched back in the chair. And when I stretched back in the chair, I heard this pop like a balloon. And I looked around and I was like, "What was that?" And I just continued to work. And then I got up to go to the bathroom again. I was like, "Dang, I just went to the bathroom." So I went to get up to go to the bathroom. When I looked down, my jeans were like saturated. And I was like, "What is going on?" I went to the bathroom and there's just like blood was just pouring out of me. And so I thing that I know to do best is call my pastor and tell her to pray for me. I called my pastor and she prayed, and then she said, "Did you call your doctor?" I'm like, "No, I called you first." She was like, "You called the doctor." So I was like, "Okay." So I called the doctor. They said I need to come to the emergency room. It's not even registering in me of what's happening. I then say I have to pick up my son. I'm a single mom. I gotta go get my kid. You know, that we don't have any family in Virginia. So I like wad paper towel and I like stuff it so I could get up and pull my pants up and get, go home. When I got up, I fainted. I fainted. When I woke up, one of my boss at the time was over me, and my colleague, we had a new colleague there, and I could hear everyone talking, but I couldn't really figure out what's going on. He wound up calling the ambulance, took me to the hospital. Get to the hospital. In the ambulance, I faint again. Um, I get to the hospital. The nurses, I'm coming to, I hear. It's so weird if you've ever fainted. Like you can still hear what's going on around you, but you just can't open your eyes and you're just out of it. So they're just like, logging me in, taking their time or whatever. They have no idea that my doctor's waiting for me on like the second floor or whatever. So they're like, "Oh, 3 months pregnant, da da da." And I come to and I'm like, "No, no, no, no. I'm 5.5 months." And I pull my blankets and whatever they had on me. And they're like, "Oh my gosh, we have to get you upstairs." I said, "My doctors are upstairs. They're waiting." So they take me upstairs. I had like every doctor, I think, medical wise, was coming in this room. And there's so much craziness that was going on in that room. My pastor wound up showing up with the ministers from my church at the time. That's why it's so important to have spiritual covering and a church family, because I truly believe if I didn't have those people in my life, I wouldn't have made it through. We talked on a previous episode the importance of prayer and the power and being able to trust someone with the ability to pray. So they were doing all of this, like trying to figure out what's happening to me, what's going on. And my doctor comes in, they do a blood transfusion. Um, my doctor comes in and gives me like five forms to sign. And my son is brought to me. Somebody had went and got Curtis and they brought him to me. And my doctor comes and she's like, sign these papers, we're gonna do this DNC, we're gonna do this surgery, we're gonna do that surgery. And she goes through this whole list. I sign all of my names to all of these forms. I have no idea what it is. And then she comes and she says, did you see your son? And I said, yeah. She said, I think you need to tell your son goodbye. And I'm like, why? And she says, because I don't think you're going to make it. So if you have any relatives that you need to talk to, you need to do that before we take you downstairs. Mm. And so I was like, I told my son, I will see him tomorrow. And I will see him tomorrow. My then boss at the time was there and she was witness, and she ran after that doctor in such a huff and such anger. Why would you say that to her? How dare you say such a terrible thing? Blah, blah, blah. So I have like two but gods in this thing. The first part is that morning when I woke up, I was very happy. I had like this newfound joy. Mind you, prior to, I had always been upset about my situation. That morning, I woke up very happy. That morning, I decided I'm going to take my anointing oil. I don't always keep it in my purse,
Wow.
but something, the Holy Spirit, not something, the Holy Spirit nudged me that morning to take my anointing oil and put it in my bag. So after my doctor left, I asked my pastor who was there and the ministers and people that like my people that were there to pray over me, to anoint me and to pray over me now. And so they did. My doctors were Christian. My doctor, she came back and she laid hands as well, both of them.
Wow.
And they wheeled me to the elevators and they were taking me downstairs to have the surgery. So what they wanted me to do was to deliver my daughter. I had to stay awake to deliver her. So I go, as we get to the elevator, my doctor, one of them says, I have to just let you know, my daughter's name was Chloe. Chloe didn't make it. And I was like, well, I kind of figured that with everything that was like,
Right.
I mean, they were literally sticking their whole arm inside of me, pulling out clots of blood because they were trying to figure out where is this, what's happening. So we get to the OR, and the pain was just unimaginable. I mean, I had a kid before, but this was like I couldn't handle it. I was in so much pain. So they wound up knocking me out. And, the doctors were like, just let her go to sleep because I was so enraged. My adrenaline must have been so high because of the pain that I was ready to take down that entire operating room. They forgot to strap my legs in at one point. I jumped up to grab the doctor because her whole arm was inside of me. She was like, it was painful. And so they were like, she needs to go down because if she doesn't go down, she's going to take us all down. I was so, my doctor at one point, I was like, I need to get out of here. I need to go home. She's like, where do you think you're going? You're in no condition to go anywhere. Lay back down. And I was like, I'm in pain and you're trying to kill me. And she was just like, you need to calm down. We're trying to save your life. Lay back down. So it put me back down. And that's when the other doctor was like, no, we need to knock her out because if she gets up again, it's going to be terrible. So they knocked me out. When I come to in the recovery room, this is why I say the power of prayer is super important.
Yeah.
The nurse, I had called my pastor. It was a Wednesday night. Wednesday night in my old church, it was Bible study.
Yeah.
It was midweek service. It was Bible study. And we did intense Bible studies. When I called my pastor, she was getting ready to go to Bible study. She had gone to Bible study to let people know during the corporate prayer time that what was happening to me because they pray in the corporate prayer time. And she came to the hospital and she took Curtis back with her. What I didn't know was while I was in the surgery, having all these surgeries that they were doing, my church was in the waiting room. When I came to in the recovery room, the nurse said to me, who are all those people? And I was like, oh, what people? What are you talking about? I have no family here. It's just me and my son. And she was like, no, the waiting room is filled with people. And I was like, oh, it's probably my church family. Cause it was such a small congregation, but it was like, we're still family oriented. That's what I loved about my church then. Um, she said they've been in there, they've been praying the entire time while this was going on.
Mm.
And so 13 years later, no, uh, 10, 12, 11 years later, I'm still here. So that's my but God, because I was told I wasn't going to make it. She had told me specifically to
Goodbye.
to my son. I had called my mom. My mom had no idea because my mom was living in New York at the time. That was in 2010. My mom was living in New York at the time and had no idea what was going on. So I just called her and kept my composure and was just letting her know what was happening. And when she asked me, but what about the baby? At that time, I already had knew within me that she did not make it. I just told my mom, I don't know. I don't think she's gonna make it. And my mom just like let out the biggest scream. I had never heard my mother get emotional like that. And I gave the phone away and was like, I cannot talk. Anyone else calls this phone, someone else answered the call. Um, and it was just like that. But God is just, you cannot put your faith in pet and people and men and women.
Ooh.
You have to put your faith and trust in God. And how God set me up that year was 6 months prior. My church family was doing an intense study on faith, the one thing that I needed to have to get me through. It was because of all of those teachings that I had for those 6 months on a Wednesday night that we were having these teachings, that built my faith inside of me for when that specialist told me you should terminate this child, it's gonna kill you, or she's gonna die, or my faith rose up to say, you are a man, God is over you, you do not get to tell me
Mm.
what's gonna happen to me. And so that has always been now my like go back to, like, I know I have purpose. I know that there is power in prayer. I know that I know God for that reason, because it is only but God that I can sit here today. I am completely healthy. I have no problems, you know, and he has helped me to just see him in that most real way, that it allows me to just say, like, you can't tell me nothing about God that ain't, you think, you have no idea, like,
But God.
death like this, like that, when someone tells you you're not going to make it,
But God.
but God, but God.
Wow.
Yeah.
That
And that's the reason why
but
I
God.
started this podcast, though.
Yeah.
Whole reason why, because I genuinely 100% believe everyone has a story like mine. Maybe not as horrible, or traumatic, but stories like this is what get us to say, God is real. God is real. And if he did it for me, he'll do it for you, because he's not a respecter of man.
Yeah.
And he always comes through, always comes through. It's like, that's, again, nothing can stop me from thinking, like, no one
God.
can tell me it's not real. Like,
I
that's it.
love that because I feel like that's always, I don't necessarily feel like I can argue my faith. I feel like my experience is what shows me he's real, you know? It's these type of encounters where God shows us who he is, and he shows us his power. And I think that sometimes can cause people to lack faith as well when he doesn't show up in the way they want him to. But even in those moments, God will show you. Just because he doesn't show up the way you want him to, he shows himself to be present. He shows himself to be God, whether it be in a moment of despair that your favorite song comes on the radio, or he has someone have been longing to hear from contact you, or you just in the moment of sadness someone reaches out to you. Those are the ways. There's no moment, no experience too small for us to acknowledge God in that
Exactly.
moment. And
Exactly.
so,
And that's exactly what we need to be doing. It's
yeah,
acknowledging him. Like scripture says, Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, right? It says to trust in the Lord, to lean on and trust in the Lord with all of your heart and all of your mind. And verse 6 says, and acknowledge him in all of your ways, and he will make your path straight, or
yeah,
plain, whatever the text is that you're reading from, the version. But that was one of my first scriptures that I learned.
mm,
And I learned it because I was going through something. And it is in that I say, you have to give God the glory. I have to give God the glory, because there is no other excuse. There is no other way to explain it.
yeah,
Even my doctors, I mean, I had five, they said there were five different doctors lined up outside that operating room, because I had a bunch of procedures done What they were going to try to do was take out my uterus, but I couldn't because I lost so much blood.
Mm.
And just to show you that, like, people are watching us all the time.
Yeah.
When I left that hospital, yes, I was on the maternity floor where babies were being born. Okay. My nurses were amazing. They would come in and I was playing worship music in my iPod and my pillow. And
Mm.
I had to get up and start walking around because they had filled me with so many fluids. They pumped myself with so much fluids. When the nurse was wheeling me out that Saturday, I left on a Saturday, she said, Lillian, if I, and she was the nurse that was with me from day one, from the day that they brought me in on that Wednesday night. She said, if I was not a believer in God, everything I know medically and what I saw happen with you, I would be a believer. She's like, you came in here whiter than a sheet. And these sheets that we put on these beds, you are walking. She said, you can walk. Like, I have to wheel you out because it's protocol. When someone's coming from the maternity ward, they have to be wheeled out. She's like, but you can walk on your own.
Yeah.
You have no medications to take. There is nothing, you know, except unfortunately you're leaving without your daughter. But you made me a believer in just instilling more of my faith, stirring it up. She said, stirring it up because of what I saw and how I saw your church family come every that night. They were there. When I came out of recovery, my pastor had gone back home because she had my son, but the other ministers were there, and they waited for me to come up from the and then they prayed over me before I went, back to bed, that first night. And then I had another procedure the next day and they were there and they were praying over me. There is power in prayer, and I know that if it wasn't for God and those people, like, I know exactly that those people, like, there's divine connections with people. God puts people in your life for a reason and for such a time. Ecclesiastics talks about there being seasons and times in our lives. And I believe if I would have been in another church or around other people, because this church, the people's faith in this church, it was in the name of the church. The church is called Faith Temple Church. They had just changed the name of the church like probably months before this was happening, while we were going through the teaching of faith.
Mm.
So it just always sticks with me to say, like, when someone says, oh, this, I'm like,
He's real.
did you talk to God? Have you talked to God about it? Like, he'll change it. He
Yeah.
can change it if you want him to. You
If
got to
your
believe it.
faith
You gotta trust in
supports
him.
it. Yeah.
Your faith supports it. And that's the thing. Our faith, we have to do our part, right? Faith, what does it say? Faith is dead without works, right?
That works is dead. Yeah.
Yeah, we need to put in the work.
That's good.
We gotta put in that work. So that's my but God, one of my but God experiences.
Yeah. Wow. That's a big one. That's you're living today. That's your book God moment. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm sitting here like, "Ugh, what am I going to talk about?" and a little nervous. But that is proof to me that it's probably what I need to talk about. And it's something that I feel like a lot of people can relate to. And I would say my book God moment is my relationship with my parents, specifically with my father.
Mm.
Um, the healing that I've encountered. And I think that a lot of people, um, when they deal with, parental issues or have daddy issues, um, that they think it's something that they have to receive from that person. Like there's a void that daddy has to fill. And for me, I think it is more of a place of personal growth and healing that has mended our relationship. And the reason why I was nervous or hesitant to talk about it is because it's not something that we really talk about. And my dad, I don't feel like necessarily feels like he's done anything that is wrong, or it could cause me not to have a great relationship with him. But it's crazy how, we talk about this all the time. Everybody experiences things differently, and everybody receives their perception of things can be different. And now that I'm an adult, I can see how, despite um, this, just looking back, I can see what causes my parents to be the way they are. When you grow up and you're able to see, some of their own experiences that causes them to be who they are. So for me, as a kid, I hated the weekends. I actually started to write this out. I might turn it into a book. I don't know, but I hated the weekends as a like elementary school, like kindergarten, because my parents would fight. My mom was very heavy in the church, and my dad wasn't. We went to a Pentecostal church, and there was always something going on. A revival, a Bible study, Sunday service, choir practice, dance practice, and I was heavily involved in church too. So it was always a fight, but just the that fear I had of my dad until even in early adulthood really caused me to have like a just a negative outlook on him, on men, and um, yeah, it really, really put a barrier between us, and to the point where I didn't want to be home. And so I didn't. And to the point where, we even got into a scuffle where, it got, aggressive with me. And I just felt like I can't trust anybody. I'm in this by myself, which is probably as soon as I was able to, I moved far away, Um, but God, but God, because the furthest I moved away was California. And
Mm,
that is where our relationship got the strongest.
mm,
I feel like sometimes, again, I say this a lot too, like California was nowhere I'd ever had on my dream list of places to live. God told me to go and I went. And it was in that place that even though I was raised in the church, even though I had this one-on-one relationship with him, it was in the place where I really developed a spiritual connection with him, where like we became tight, me and God. And in that place, I just found myself without even, being, aware of it, healing, to the point where me and my dad would sit on the phone cracking up for 2+ hours, you know, and, it wasn't a conversation. It wasn't, I'm sorry for this, even last week, I brought up some of the experiences, and my dad will always say, well, my dad was crazy, like and looking back and hearing some of the stories, his dad really was crazy, which is like it's a blessing he's as normal as he is. Because his dad had bad PTSD, would shoot in the house, would shoot at the kids like crazy, crazy, beat his mother,
mm,
all of that stuff. So like to witness those things and come out normal, somewhat, is a blessing. So those are the things where you're like, you have no idea. I know that there's things that my mom's even gone through in her upbringing that I don't know. We hold our parents to such a high pedestal, and we have such high expectations of them, where they're just human like us, and it took me becoming an adult to realize that, that I'm now at the age that they were when I was young, when I was going through certain things with them. And I make some poor decisions, and I can only imagine how those poor decisions would impact my children. So yeah, it took me moving as far away as the other side of the country to heal, like I said, subconsciously,
mm,
and develop this stronger relationship with my father, where that entire first year I was there, we would talk on the phone for long periods of time. And then, when he ended up having a stroke, I was on the first plane back to Maryland to be by his side, and stayed here until I knew he was, going to make it. So I say all that to say the but God, of course, is just the healing, and that you don't have to be okay with your childhood. You don't have to be okay with some of the experiences that you may have had. But you do have to strive to heal. And I keep saying that word, but it's
yeah,
such an important task,
yeah,
to really strive to heal, because it will impact your future relationships. I know for me, I definitely didn't trust men, didn't respect men, didn't um yeah, I just didn't have respect for them. I was rude, and I'm like, no man's gonna disrespect me or play me. Like I was, very disrespectful to men specifically, because of my upbringing. And it took me taking a step back, that first year or two in California, I didn't date. I just was working on me, and it helped me realize some of those flaws in myself and the areas that I was allowing to impact those around me, because of just the way my brain was molded into thinking because of my experiences.
Mm,
So I encourage people, because I know a lot of people have issues with their fathers, some even a lot worse than mine, um, to really, really do the work within you to
right.
heal, because you may never get a I'm sorry. You may never get any remorse. You may never even get the opportunity to have a relationship, with that person. They could not be interested. They could, sometimes they leave Earth before your opportunity to heal that relationship. But it's something that really has to be done within you so that
Absolutely.
you can be the best person that you can be.
Mm,
So whatever that looks like for you, it doesn't necessarily mean moving to the other side of the country. It
mhm.
might mean, going to therapy. It might mean, finding a church home where, there are a strong group of believers that are going to feed into you and pray with you. It can look like so many different things. It might mean, you know, just there's so many ways, but I feel like it's so, so important for us to do that work so that we can, move on with life. Life is too short to be harboring on to old negative past
Mhm.
experiences. As deeply as they may be rooted in us, as deeply as they may affect us, we have to really, really, want to,
Yeah.
we have to want to
Yeah.
be better. We have to want to not let this become a generational curse, because that's, like I said, with my father, his father was this way. So,
Mhm.
and we have to say the buck stops here, and that only comes from us really, really wanting to get over it, and it's easier said than done, but you really, really have to do that work so that you can be the best you, and so that your children and their children don't continue to have these same experiences. So that's my
Absolutely.
but God experience in a
Absolutely.
nutshell.
It is so, so good. And like you said, there are so many people, myself included, like have these issues with their father.
Mhm.
You know, I always thought that because my parents, I grew up in a two-parent household, that I was like better than my friends who had divorced parents. Because I don't have daddy issues. My dad's in the house every day. Like I know where my dad is. But it wasn't until I got older and I got saved and I eventually had my son, or had my son first and then got saved, and I realized like I got a lot of issues. I got a lot of issues with my dad. And God helped me to have the time before he left this earth to work those things out.
Yeah.
Like, so you're right. Like, but I will say it is important that we just work on us first.
Right.
That you worked on you first. I worked on me first, me finding my relationship with God and working on discovering who I am in God is how I was able to go to my dad and, repair our relationship before he died. I don't know how I would have been able to manage because my father wasn't sick. He
Yeah.
wasn't sick. He just died
Mhm.
in his sleep. He was watching the Yankee and Mets Subway Series on June 29th, 2008. And he went to sleep. My father was drinking, like to have his little drink. Went to sleep. Next morning, he didn't wake up. There was no warning. There was nothing. So so grateful for me that I had the time, literally weeks before, to say and work out some things.
Yeah.
I don't know, like I have nothing in me that's like regretful or remorseful because he was able to hear me.
Right. Right.
That's the gift that God gave me, you know. He can give it to other people too. And if your father isn't here, that doesn't mean that you still have to walk around with the pain, like you said earlier. Like you can still do the work because
Mhm.
forgiveness is a gift to you, not to them. And
Exactly.
that's what I think people want to believe, like, I'm not going to forgive that person because that's me letting them off the hook. And no,
Yeah.
that person has moved on with their life. They're doing them.
Yeah.
You're holding on to some bitterness and pain. And if you can let that go, you'll be so much better for it.
You'll be so much better and you'll have so much more to offer the
Yeah.
world, because it really, really hinders you and it really holds you back, and I really, really feel like so many of us let those things hold us back, and let it keep us from being who we're supposed to be. So I
Yeah.
really want all of us to do that work, because you know, man, I just remember there's so many things that I would like think and believe, and I just felt like there's a reason. There's a reason there's so much tension between fathers specifically, I feel like, and their children. There's such a big weight, that responsibility. We have another episode where we talked about like the role of a husband or the role of a man, but fatherhood is such a big role. It's such a big role, and I feel like there needs to be more conversations amongst men about that too, about the significance of that role and the effect that it can have, your behavior in that role can have on a child's life, you know. But I'm so, so, so grateful for my father, because me and my father, we're so much alike, and that's probably part of it too. Like we're big,
It's always what it is.
we're such big jokesters. We get on my mom's nerves with how silly we are, and like just to see where we are now. And I know there's other barriers that held him back from being able to show that side of himself when I was younger. But I'm so grateful that I'm able to see it now and appreciate it much more now. And I feel like that's the situation with a lot of things where not having or having a void, and then when you do have that thing, you appreciate it so much more, and so yeah, I'm
Wow.
grateful. Same thing as with relationships, the things that I didn't receive or the things that I went through in relationships, I know now what I want or require, in
Mhm.
a new relationship. And that's the same thing. Some of the things that I didn't receive from my father, I know I would want to see from a husband to my child. And same thing, so yeah, it's been a learning experience and I'm so grateful for it.
It's so cool how God allowed you to have that experience without having a child first.
Hmm.
It took me to have my son to really appreciate. And I think it happens that way for a lot of people, that they really start to realize, like, oh my gosh, now I get why my mom was like this, or I get why my dad was like this, or how come my dad didn't look at me in this way when I just look at my
Or
son,
your child. Yeah.
you know? So it's such a gift that he gave you that
Yeah.
before, because
Mm.
now you just have such an awareness for it, and an even fonder appreciation for it. So,
Yeah. I think it's because I've had so much adulthood. I being that
mhm.
I'm in my 30s and don't have a kid yet, but I've been an adult for a while now. Like I feel like I've had so much being on my own to see just how difficult adulthood is, and like and yeah, so I'm very, very grateful to have that lesson now, very grateful and so excited about the future, and I just value family so much more now. I really, really value family so much more. Like I said, I feel like I was on the first plane smoking, in my young adulthood, but now I'm just so grateful to have my parents, because not everyone does.
Right, right.
Um, Yeah, and to be able to talk to them, to be able to have a safe haven to come home to. I'm living under their household, under their roof right now, you know. Not everyone has that. So, yeah, I am blessed,
It's
blessed.
a gift to know that, like you said, to be able to sit back and say you have compassion for and empathy for the way that he and how the product that he came out of from the environment that he was raised in.
Yeah.
It could have been a lot
Yeah, I
worse.
couldn't imagine.
Right. Could you imagine being what he had to, a quarter of what he had to deal with, especially if that was just within his house.
Hmm.
Outside of his house, the world was still going on in such a
In the
terrible time
60s as a black man.
as a black man in the
Yeah.
South. Like,
Mhm.
just on top of, on top of, on top of.
Right.
And so having that, and so like I had a conversation with somebody the other day, and they were like, "Well, I'm not going to accept excuses from people. Everybody has, their life." I said, "It's not an excuse. It's really just trying to empathize with them
Yeah.
and just understand, like, they've gone through some things."
Yeah, and I'm blessed in that each generation gets a little bit better, you
Yeah,
know?
and that's what we want,
My
right?
dad adores my mom now, and
Right.
like their relationship is solid. He's Minister Gibson now,
Yeah, look
And
at him.
so like, and I feel like, my relationship will be even better, and then my kids' relationships will be even better. So yeah, it's a blessing. I feel like that's the way things are supposed to go. That's how you break those generational curses, and that each
Absolutely.
generation should get a little bit better.
Absolutely, absolutely. It just takes work, right? He had to put in some work. Mom had to put
Exactly.
in some work. You
Yeah.
have to put in some work, and then your kids will have to put in work. But it's a beautiful thing to see when everyone is healed, you know, and
Yeah,
that, healing is, it's the best thing in the world if we could
it is.
get on that same page.
Yes, yes. And it starts with a desire to do so. So we
Yeah.
encourage you to find the will within yourself to heal. Find the will within yourself to be better, to do the work, to, have those difficult conversations and mend those broken relationships so that you can authentically be your best self.
Like Renee said, it's have the will, but do the work. These two go hand in hand.
Yeah.
It's like faith without works is dead.
Yeah.
Can't just be dreaming for Prince Charming to come and you not doing what you like. We talked about once before, like, I got to do some work
Yeah.
if I want him to come. Like, so have the will, have the desire. If you have it, then you're in line with what God wants for you, and then do the work. Baby steps. Take it slow. Making yourself aware is the first step. I think that's what they talk about in I'm not an AA person, but I have some family members that were in AA. And I think awareness is like the first,
Yeah.
acceptance and awareness is
Yeah.
like the first step
Mhm.
in it. And then you got to start doing the work, action.
Right.
Isn't that like AA, awareness, acceptance, and action? Is that what that stands for? No, it's Alcoholics Anonymous.
I say I have no clue. No. No. So
But
this
yeah,
was good. I'm just happy that we were able to share our own stories because we get on here and we talk about some lighter moments and we get to talk to others about their great but God experiences. But now you get to know a little bit more about us. So
hmm
thank you guys for tuning in. Any last words, Lillian?
no, I just wish everyone well.
Yes. Have an amazing week. Until next Tuesday, I'm Renee.
And I'm Lillian.
Thanks for tuning into the But God podcast.